Hello, my name is Dr. Jackie Abbott, and I'm in the Department of Nutritional Sciences here at Rutgers. And I'm excited to be able to talk to you about what is healthy eating, and more importantly, how do you achieve it? And this is especially important to talk about now because during the pandemic, more than ever, it's important to really make nutrition a priority. So let's talk about what that is and how do we make nutrition a priority. Making nutrition a priority. What does this actually mean? Now, I'm going to go over a couple of topics and introduce them here on this slide, but then I promise I'll go over in much more detail in the upcoming slides. So first and foremost, when we make nutrition a priority, it means that we need to be choosing nutrient-dense food options. It's okay if you're like, I don't know what nutrient-dense food options are, because I'm going to show you in a couple slides. Another important thing is to plan our meals and snacks. And I know with the pandemic and initially the beginning stages of it with the restrictions on being able to eat out, order out, or even get to the grocery store, a lot of us probably found that we were planning our meals and snacks a little bit more. Or perhaps you found that you weren't doing that and you were scrambling to figure out what to eat. Now, it's so important to be able to plan ahead because when we do plan ahead, we're better able to focus our eating patterns and behavior on those that are going to be the most beneficial to improving our health and helping to mitigate the negative impacts that quarantine can have on our body weight. Now, if you think about it, there's that old saying, the freshman 15. Well, there's kind of the COVID-19. Suddenly, a lot of us find ourselves sitting in front of a computer much more than we were before, not being able to get out and be as active as we used to be. And with a lot of that sitting and inactivity also comes boredom eating or stress eating because this has been a very stressful period in a lot of our lives. So let's talk about how nutrition can help to mitigate some of that. Before we go and talk about what healthy eating actually looks like, let's talk about things that I don't think we always address as well when we're giving nutrition or health advice. And that is, why do we even need to worry about that? What is healthy eating? And probably one of the most important, kind of often overlooked parts of this is, how do we actually implement this advice that I keep reading about or hearing about? So here's the why, and you've probably heard this before, but the dietary choices that we make directly impact our health today and for years to come. Now, maybe you're like me and you're in your early 40s, so you've had 40 years to hopefully make good dietary choices, but you've probably made some bad ones too. And you can definitely see the impact of those dietary choices on your health now. If you've been doing great and making great choices, you're probably in great health at the moment. If perhaps you haven't always made the best choices, you may see that you are at higher risk for certain health adverse effects. Now, diet is modifiable risk factor for many of the leading causes of death. Predominantly, we're talking here heart disease, and there also are some diet related cancers in which diet can help to reduce our risk for. But I'm going to talk about heart disease because that is one of the leading causes of death for both men and women. And how we eat can directly impact our risk from having either a adverse effect from heart disease or even mortality. So let's take a moment and look at this infographic because it has some really shocking stats on here that I want to review, kind of like scare us into making sure that we understand how important nutrition is. So if you look here at the arrow I pointed, the average American consumes 130 grams of sugar. This is added sugar, so things that we add to the foods or the drinks that we consume. Now, 130 pounds, that's like a small adult. That's a lot of sugar. Americans spend 10% of their disposable income on fast food, and 70% of the foods in the US diet, about 70% comes from processed foods. Now, foods that are already in a box or in a can or things like that, they aren't necessarily all unhealthy for us. Some processed foods take away some of the steps and that preparation and the time to make a food, and they can still be of a higher quality and fit into a healthy diet plan. But a lot of foods, such as those pictured here, soda, fast food French fries, or fast food hamburger, these are not foods that are going to be high on the list of things that we should be eating. And all of these kind of poor dietary habits has led to an obesity epidemic in the country. So more than a third of US adults are overweight or obese. And that in itself increases our risk for having adverse health effects, including increasing one's risk for having a more adverse reaction if you are to become infected with COVID-19. So I mentioned before that what we eat directly impacts our health today as well as our health in the future. But when we're talking about our health today, the dietary choices that we're making right now can either strengthen or weaken our body's ability to fight a COVID-19 infection. So I love this quote down here. You are free to choose, but you are not free from the consequence of your choice. And so, really, what I take away when I hear that quote is that we need to be more mindful of the choices that we're making. And I think, given that there's a lot of concern today amidst this pandemic, that it's a good time to really stop and reevaluate our dietary habits and not just look at them as we have for years in terms of improving our body weight or our body composition, but also look at it in terms of how we can improve the overall health of our body so it's strong enough should we get sick from COVID-19 or any other, flu or illness that may be out there. This is a good point in the presentation to kind of pause and talk about diet, because when we talk about food and eating and healthy eating, we're always thinking the word diet. And I really want to talk about what that word means. So, the word diet, D-I-E-T, comes from a Greek origin, dieta. And I apologize to everyone who speaks Greek. I don't. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that word. But that word means way of life. And so it's very interesting because in our society, we look at the word diet as being something that we go on and off of. Excuse the little red mark, I kind of crossed off my word, or something that is depriving us of something. So a lot of times people say, oh, I'm on a diet, I can't eat that. So we equate diet with really negative things. And I think because we're looking at diet in that way, a lot of times we set ourselves up for failure. Instead, we need to look at our diet as a way of life. And what kind of life do you want to live? Do you want to live a healthy life where you're able to have energy to do all the things you want to do, that your body's strong enough to fight off infections? Or do you want to lead a life where you can barely get off the couch during the day? And if you were to get sick, you can get very, very sick because your body's not strong enough. So when we start to reevaluate the way that we look at diet, I think it can help us better adopt healthy eating behaviors that we stick with, because that's one of the most important things is people go on a diet, they achieve their goal, and then they go off their diet, and suddenly they find themselves a few months later back needing to go on a diet. So let's get off of that, yo-yo roller coaster here and talk about reevaluating diet and what it means and how we can choose a diet that'll support our healthy way of life. Another thing to highlight is that our diet composition is really not black and white or quite as simple as saying one macronutrient over the other is to blame for all the evils of the world. And so I put this slide up here because I want us to look at our diets as a whole and to look at the quality of the foods we eat. So the quality of the foods that give us fats, the quality of the foods that give us carbohydrate, the quality of the foods that give us protein, and realize that the quality and combination of those foods helps to create a healthy diet, and that we can't just blame one or two of these nutrients for all the evils of the world, despite the fact that every few years we like to come up with a new scapegoat for poor diet. Is got to be protein, or it's going to be fat, or it's carbohydrate, or it's a component of all of them, or it's something like gluten. And a lot of people don't even know what gluten is, but they're afraid of it and think it's terrible for them. So what I really hope to do is give you guys tools so that you can make informed decisions and judgments about food, and not to look at it so simply as this is good and this is bad. So now let's move on and talk about the what. Specifically, let's answer this question. What should I eat if I want to eat a healthy diet? The answer is nutrient dense foods. And what does that mean? Now, nutrient dense foods are foods that pack the most nutrition into each calorie. Now, if we look here, we have a picture showing us calorie versus nutrient density. So calorie or energy, because remember, calories are what give us energy, or perhaps you don't remember, but FYI, calories are what give us energy. Energy dense foods, calorie dense foods, pack a lot of calories into generally a small volume of food. So if we look here up on the top, we have a very calorie dense diet. So all this food here, and it's really not all that much, gives you 2,150 calories. Compared to if you look down here at a nutrient dense diet, you get more foods. And not only do you get more foods, but you get more nourishing calories. So it's important to note that all foods can give you calories if they're caloric. So, water is considered a beverage or a liquid in something that we consume, and it doesn't provide us with calories. But all foods that provide you with calories can give your body energy. So give your body energy to think, to move, just to function. But not all of those foods are going to nourish your body. And nourishing our body is so important because that nourishment is what helps to keep our body strong and healthy. It helps to prevent us from becoming overweight. It helps to prevent us from having an increased risk for cardiovascular disease related to our dietary intake. And in this day and age, it helps us to have a stronger immune system if we're choosing those nutrient-dense foods. And that stronger immune system, in turn, can help us fight off infections, including the COVID-19. Okay, so we know that we need to choose, or we should be choosing nutrient dense foods. So, how do we choose those and where are we going to find them? This slide here shows you how you could pack a nutrient dense refrigerator, freezer, and pantry with some nutrient dense staples. And this is really helpful nowadays when you may find that you're not going to the grocery store as often. And so you want to make sure that when you have the munchies, you can go into your pantry or your refrigerator and there's something healthy to choose from. So in our fridge and our freezer, stock them with frozen fruits and vegetables. Now, frozen fruits and vegetables are picked at their peak. So they are going to be most nutrient dense when they're picked, and then they're usually flash frozen. And so that will help to retain that nutrient quality. And then they're going to be packaged and we buy them. So it's totally fine to have frozen fruits and vegetables. And especially as the season change, and you maybe enjoy blueberries and strawberries, but as we start to get out of those seasons, you're not going to find the most nutrient dense blueberries and strawberries at the grocery store. In fact, you'd be better to get them in the frozen section. Frozen cooked rice, you may not realize that this exists, but it is an amazing lifesaver. You can buy frozen cooked white or brown. I'd recommend brown because that's more nutrient dense. And you can microwave it in 3 minutes. You have light and fluffy brown rice. And if you've ever made brown rice before, you know you cannot make it in 3 minutes. You also can buy frozen beans. Frozen fish, skinless poultry, or any animal proteins. You can also buy all of these non-frozen, and then freeze them yourself. I mean, if I cook my own rice, for instance, and I have a lot left over, a common thing I'll do is I'll put it in a freezer-friendly bag and I'll freeze it. And then when I want to make a recipe that calls for cooked rice, then I can take that out of the freezer, defrost it, and have it in there. And so that saves me a step of cooking more rice, and I'm wasting less food. Egg whites are great to have in the refrigerator, freezer. Egg whites in the refrigerator are great because sometimes I know, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, it could be difficult to find fresh eggs at the grocery store. And oftentimes the grocery stores are still limiting how much you can buy of certain products, including eggs. Egg whites tend to have a longer shelf life than eggs in a carton do, and therefore they can be great to just have on hand if you find that you ran out of eggs and you need some. Use the liquid eggs. Nuts and seeds, these are great. They can be used as a healthy snack. They can be added to oatmeal, added to salads. Low-fat dairy if you include dairy in your diet. Also hard cheeses. A little bit of hard cheese can add a beautiful flavor and bring out some flavor in food. Plain yogurt. Plain yogurt can be sweetened, and that's what I tend to recommend to people. A lot of sweetened yogurts that you buy are full of added sugar. That added sugar is not doing anything besides giving you calories. So choose a plain yogurt and sweeten it yourself. Add some defrosted fruit, or if you have fresh fruit, add the fresh fruit. You will be able to sweeten that yogurt, and you're going to get more nutrition from doing it that way versus choosing a pre-sweetened yogurt that you buy at the grocery store. Now our pantry, we can have canned fruits and vegetables, and I'll talk about canned fruits and vegetables in a sec on the next slide, because I know some people have questions about that. Ideally look for canned vegetables that are low in sodium, or if we're talking about fruits that are canned in 100% juice. But if you can't find that, don't worry about it. Don't stress out. You can rinse the canned vegetables. Just dump them into a colander and rinse them off. You're going to get rid of a lot of that extra sodium that was in the liquid, and you'll reduce the sodium content of the vegetable. Same can be had for fruit. Dump the canned fruit into a colander, rinse it off, and you're going to get rid of that extra sugary syrup. Now, sauces to have on hand, tomato sauce and salsa, they can be used in a variety of different things. Sometimes people just think of chips and dip when they think of salsa, but I love to add salsa to eggs, or if I make a burrito bowl, I'll put some salsa on that. So there's a lot of ways to get some good nutrient-dense tomatoes and peppers into your diet with salsa. Now, dried fruit as well as dried vegetables. In soups, you can rehydrate the dried vegetables. Dried fruits can be added to things such as oatmeal or yogurt, like I said before, sweeten your yogurt. Nut butters, that can be peanut, almond, cashew, whatever fits into your diet. Having soups and broths available are great. Some of the soups can be very high in sodium, so if sodium is something that you need to watch out for, that you've been told to, then choose broths and soups that are reduced sodium. They're also great to have on hand, because you'll find if you're cooking more, that a lot of recipes call for a broth or a soup. Dry and canned beans and legumes, these are excellent sources of protein. And particularly during the pandemic, I know that it has been more challenging sometimes to go to the grocery store and find the animal-based proteins like chicken, poultry, beef. And also the cost of those can go up. And as people may find that they don't have as large of a disposable income for their food, they need to kind of cut back, but you worry about getting good quality proteins. Dried and canned beans and legumes are excellent ways to add protein, and you can use them in substitution of where you would typically use an animal protein. Other ways to get some shelf-stable animal proteins would be to choose canned chicken, tuna, or salmon. Now, when it comes to canned chicken, I tell people you can use canned chicken in any recipe that you typically would use what you would perhaps call like a rotisserie chicken. If you're taking the chicken off the rotisserie, or if you roasted a chicken and you have leftovers, maybe you're going to make a soup of that leftover, you can do the same thing with canned chicken. Yes, the consistency will be a little bit different, but flavor-wise, it's going to not really affect the flavor of your food. So it's a great kind of substitute if you're used to using roasted chicken and you're not able to find a whole chicken to roast or buy one at the grocery store. This is an easy and sometimes less expensive way to get some chicken. Sturdy produce such as apples, which are great at this time of year because they're right in season, citrus, celery, broccoli, and onions, these tend to have a longer shelf life. If you start to see some of your produce starting to wilt or turn potentially bad before you've had a chance to use it, don't be afraid to chop it up, freeze it. Fruit freezes really well, and it could be great in a smoothie, or you can defrost it and add it to yogurt or oatmeal or cereal later on. With vegetables, you can chop them up and freeze them and then add them to soups. So instant or quick cook oatmeal, pasta, brown rice, whole grain couscous, whole grain breads, low sugar cereal, tortillas, and of course, getting flour and yeast if you are going to tackle making your own bread. These are all great things to have in the pantry. Okay, which is better? This is often a question that people have. If I can't find the fresh version or in-season version of the fruit or vegetable that I want to consume, why would I want to choose the frozen or canned? That's just so bad for you. Well, the truth of the matter is that it's not. As I mentioned before on the previous slide, when produce, so fruits and vegetables, are picked to be canned or frozen, they are generally picked at the peak, the prime. And so therefore they're going to be their most nutrient dense. And then they are going to be quickly processed so that they can be preserved, either canned or frozen. So you are going to get a very nutrient dense produce product when you buy it. Now, again, if you're concerned about sodium, you can definitely look for low sodium variety of canned vegetables, or you can You can rinse them. Same with fruits. If you're worried about the added sugar that some canned fruits can have when they're canned in syrups, just rinse that syrup or look for fruits that are canned in 100% fruit juice. But what I don't want people to do is forego eating fruits and vegetables because they can't find a fresh in-season version. And oftentimes people think, oh, well, fresh is just automatically best. That's not necessarily true, especially if you're shopping in the dead of winter and you see a bunch of strawberries in the produce section. We do know that strawberries do not grow. Their growing season is not December in New Jersey, so you're not going to get the freshest strawberry. That strawberry is coming from somewhere miles and miles away, and so there, by the time it's transported to you, it's not as nutrient dense as the frozen strawberry could be. If you have time next summer, think of this in advance. When you have your fresh strawberries and blueberries in season, freeze some of them. Get enough that you want to eat the ones you have on hand, and then cut up and freeze some of them. And then you can keep those frozen strawberries or blueberries for the next season, for winter, and you can defrost them and eat them as necessary or as needed. Bottom line is that I want to see people eating more fruits and vegetables and not necessarily being too concerned about if it comes from a canned or frozen form. The only other thing that I should warn you about with canned is that some cans are lined with a material known as BPA, and there are concerns, health-related concerns with foods coming from cans lined with BPA. And so you can find, and this is something that I do look for too, you can find oftentimes if you read the label of the canned food, it will clearly say if it is a BPA-free lining. And that's generally, you'll see a little sticker somewhere on the can that says BPA-free lining. And that is something to look out for if you are concerned about BPA, or if that's another concern you have, you just don't like the things coming in cans. Almost everything you can find frozen or in a can, you can also find frozen or fresh if it's in season. Now, I liked this quote. I saw it once, a friend shared it on social media, and a lot of times I just kind of skim through quotes that people share, but I read this one and I thought it really hit home. So, can we please stop splitting hairs between the minor or non-existent nutritional difference between organic and conventional and fresh and frozen canned produce? Purchase whatever you prefer and what is available to you geographically and financially. Just eat your fruits and vegetables, however you can get them in. How privileged are we to even be having this conversation to have of all the incredibly safe and nutritious choices that are available to us? So bottom line here is get your fruits and vegetables in and don't worry so much about the form that they're coming. Choose the form that's going to meet your needs, and everyone's needs are going to be slightly different. So choose the form that's going to meet your needs. Moving on now to the how, and this is probably one of the most important aspects of adopting a healthy eating practices is knowing how to actually do it. I mean, I could talk until I'm blue in my face about what you should do, but you could leave this conversation and not know how to actually implement the advice that I'm giving to you. So I really want to make sure that you have the how so you can implement. So we need tools along with our advice, like I mentioned before, to implement any changes, or else we're really kind of setting ourselves up for failure. And I don't want to send anyone home with great information that they don't know how to use. So I'm going to provide you on the next couple of slides tools that will help you choose healthier foods, tools that will help you plan healthy meals and snacks, and tools that will help you better prepare these meals and snacks. Because you might be able to choose, because I told you on the previous slides, these are good foods to choose from. You might be slightly able to plan something, but maybe you don't know how to even begin to prepare. So let's talk about all these aspects. Okay, so how do you choose healthy foods? One thing that you need to know how to do is read the food label. There are lots of foods that you're going to buy that have a nutrition facts food label. If they are a fresh food, oftentimes they do not include a nutrition facts food label, but you can have bagged produce that does have nutrition facts food label on it. So it's important that as a consumer, we're informed and we understand how to read that label. So there's a couple things I want to point out. So when we're learning to read the label, there are really four things that I want you to focus on. first I want you to look at serving sizes. And don't worry, I'll talk about this label right here in a minute. Then I want you to look at calories. Then I want you to look at how much saturated fat is there and how much added sugar there's in there. Then I want you to look at the column called daily value. And you'll be like, what is that? And then lastly, we'll also look a little bit at that ingredient list. So let's move over here to the right. Here's a sample label for frozen lasagna. Now, the label on the side of the food box will not be as colorful as this. This is just colorful to help you see the different sections. So first and foremost, if you look at the very top in this blue section, you will see how many servings per container. This is a very important thing to note because just because the container seems small doesn't mean it only has one serving of food in it. And this can be a mistake that a lot of us make, particularly with our snack foods. We're like, well, that bag of chips doesn't look that big. I could eat that in one sitting. Sure you can, but it had 4 servings in it. So what does that mean? The other thing you want to look at is, what is an actual serving size? So for this food, it would be 1 cup. And I recommend to people sometimes is, just actually take a moment when you have it to measure things out. This is great with cereal. A lot of times the serving size of cereal varies anywhere from half a cup to 1 whole cup, typically around maybe 3/4 of a cup. Measure that out with measuring cups at your home. Pour it into a bowl so you can visually see what that looks like, because a lot of us have no idea what that actually looks like. Then you want to look at the calories, and this is the calories per serving. So if you were to eat this whole frozen lasagna, you would have to multiply these calorie load here by 4. So you're getting over 1,000 calories if you ate that whole lasagna. Then you move down to this kind of yellowy section, and this yellowy section shows you all the nutrients in the food. So these are going to be standard on all food labels, but what'll differ a little bit is down here are your micronutrients. So all foods that require a label will have these 4 micronutrients listed: vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. But a lot of foods will have several more listed that they just choose to, but not all foods do. So if you look at the side of a cereal food box, you'll see this list is much longer, and it generally lists most micronutrients, most vitamins and minerals. And then the last place I want you to look, let me go back. I told you to look at the nutrients, then I forgot to tell you which ones to focus on. What I want you to focus on when we're looking at these nutrients is I want you to look at saturated fat. That's our solid fat. So the fat that's solid at room temperature. So if you think about butter is solid at room temperature, the fat on meat is solid at room temperature, that marbling. That is the type of fat that if we consume too much of it, can increase our risk for cardiovascular disease. And so we really want to make sure that we are not over consuming this. Another thing we want to look at is under our carbohydrate. Remember, not all carbohydrates are evil, but we want to be careful and not consume too much added sugar. So we look over here at added sugars. Carbohydrates now been divided into total sugars that are in there and then that are naturally in the carbohydrate. So if this is lasagna, it has noodles, and noodles are predominantly made from wheat, and wheat is a carbohydrate. Then you can see that there's no added sugar in this lasagna. Now, if this was a children's breakfast cereal, sugar sweetened breakfast cereal, you would see a lot of grams of added sugar here. And another great one to look at is dietary fiber. So dietary fiber, basically, if you think about it, it helps to exercise our gastrointestinal tract. It helps to keep things moving quickly and not too quickly through that GI tract and helps to keep that healthy. So one of the ways to know if a food is a good source of or perhaps too much of something is to look at this daily value column here all the way over on the right in the purple. It's not going to be purple again on the food label. But daily value has to do with a diet based off of 2,000 calories a day. And I know that not everyone here needs 2,000 calories. Some of us need more, some of us need less. But it's a general guideline that can be useful. So if you see a 5% or less in that column, that means that whatever nutrient has 5% or less of that, that food is low in that nutrient. So let's find an example here. The only one I can find is added sugar. So this food is low in added sugar because it has 0%. Now, if you see something has 20% or more of a nutrient, it is high in that. You love to see that in the fiber area. And in fact, this food actually is pretty good. It's at 14%. But what you don't want to see it in the area of is sodium. You don't want a lot of added sodium, but we have 37% in this frozen lasagna. So that means that lasagna is high in added sodium. And then also another more concerning column would be our saturated fat at 23%. So this, just one serving of this frozen lasagna is going to be high in saturated fat. So that's a quick, simple tool that I think most people have no idea what it is, but it's a way to kind of quickly look at the nutrition facts label and kind of assess if a food may be a good option for you. So let's move back now to the ingredient list. Oftentimes you'll see the ingredient list listed below the nutrition facts food label. And it's important to note that the list is generated based on the weight of the food, of the ingredient in the food. So generally the most predominant ingredient is going to be listed first. So you want to look for things like if you're specific, if you're looking at grains, you want to look for whole grain to be the very first ingredient, because that means that's going to be made from the whole grain. It's going to be the most nutrient dense. One of the things you're going to want to watch out for are for sugars, added sugars. If you see sugar, brown sugar, corn syrup, as you can see here, modified cornstarch, molasses, honey, these are all sugars that have been added to the food. So they are not naturally present in the food. They've been added to it, and too much added sugar is just going to give you calories without a lot of micronutrients, without a lot of that nourishment like I keep talking about. So look at the ingredient list and, watch out for foods that have too many added sugars or added fats up high on that ingredient list. All right, so let's keep moving on and talking about the how-tos. Now, what are some simple tricks that we can use to add nutrient density to our diet? One of the easiest things that we can do, and maybe it's not easy for everybody, but is to increase the intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, lean proteins, and if you include it in your diet, low-fat dairy. Now, increasing the intake of these foods has been shown to not only reduce our overall hunger, but enhance our satiety, which go hand in hand. And so if we are more satisfied after a meal and we're paying attention to our bodies, then we are less likely to overeat. The other thing that you're going to find with nutrient dense foods is that you're going to nourish your body a lot better. You're going to get all of those micro and macronutrients that your body needs to really stay strong and healthy. So I recommend to everyone to choose a variety of foods from all of the different food groups. So the best thing you do is look at your plate. Is it predominantly brown? We need some variety. Eat a rainbow. And I love this little infographic here because it shows you a variety of different foods and what micronutrients they supply you with. So you can see if you're eating a variety of colors, you're going to get a variety of micronutrients here. So here specifically, we're just looking at vitamins. But we could also have minerals here. We could have fiber. These are all going to be nutrients that you're going to get a lot more of if you choose a variety of foods. But really the most important thing to do is not just fill your grocery basket with foods that I tell you are good for you, but also fill your grocery baskets that match your dietary preferences, your budget, and what is available to you. So this is why I really prefer people have kind of a template for meal planning versus following a specific sample menu. Because you can go online and you can find examples of like a 1,500 or 1,800 calorie menu plan. But oftentimes you might look at those foods and say, well, I don't eat kale and I don't like beans and I don't like this. So what good is that menu to you if it doesn't have foods that you're willing to or are interested in eating? So instead, I like people to use things like that as a template. So, okay, you don't like kale, find a different leafy green vegetable that you may be more interested in eating, such as spinach. You don't eat beans. Okay, well, that's a good high quality protein source for you. Maybe we can look for a lean animal protein source if that's something you would prefer. And that's a way to try and match your dietary preferences as well as your budget and what's available to you to a nutrient dense diet. Okay, so we talked about how can we identify and choose nutrient dense foods. Now let's talk about how we can put them into a meal plan. So one of the things that's important when we're planning our meals out is to kind of think ahead. Think of meals and snacks that are going to focus on nutrient density. So look in your pantry and your refrigerator and see what it is that you already have on hand. I really like to encourage people to try and utilize what you have on hand so it doesn't go to waste and we just throw it out. Then, write out a grocery list. Think of when I showed you that slide on your pantry, include on that list some staples that you can have in your pantry, in your refrigerator, in your freezer. Now, there are a lot of benefits to planning. First and foremost, it can really help control the cost of grocery shopping because you know exactly what you need for your meals and you're not going to potentially overspend on foods that you don't get around to eating, or you find yourself with a lot of food, but maybe not anything you can put together to make a meal with. Makes for a much more efficient grocery trip. You can get in and out quickly when you have that clear list. And one of the things I think is useful when you're making a grocery list is to think of the grocery store and how it looks. Typically on the outskirts of the grocery store, you will have your refrigerated dairy products, you will have your meat and your animal proteins, you will have your produce, your fruits and vegetables, and then in the inner columns, you tend to have more of your packaged foods or some of your breads or grains. Now, I know different grocery stores change up their format, and sometimes they stick the produce right in the center of the grocery store, but in general, think about how your grocery store is laid out and how you like to walk through it, and that might help you design how you write out your grocery list. Another thing that's been great, and I think it's become even easier since COVID hit, is that we can do a lot of online grocery shopping. And I know I found in my area in particular that there's just so much more convenience. It used to be, an additional $10.95 or $12.95 fee. And if you wanted to do online shopping, you didn't have as many options of when you could pick it up or if they could deliver it. And now it seems like there's just so many more options available. So this can be a really great thing, especially if you find yourself super busy with everything going on in life right now. Now, when you plan your diet out, you can generally improve the quality of your diet, and it can help you be more mindful. Again, this is a very stressful time, and a lot of people, including myself, can deal with stress by stress eating and going towards those things that are comforting. And so if we are choosing nutrient-dense foods to pack our pantry and refrigerator and freezer with, when we feel that urge to eat, we'll have something healthier to choose from. All right, so you have that list of nutrient-dense foods. You're ready to go to the grocery store, or sit down at your computer and do your online grocery shopping. But how do you make a meal out of all this nutrient-dense food? I mentioned before that I'm really more of a fan of a meal planning template than I am of a specific menu that tells you exactly what to eat, because it gives you more leeway to choose foods that you and your family like to eat or things that you're willing to try. Now, I love My Plate, which is from the USDA, choosemyplate.gov. And this is kind of the replacement, or it's not kind of, it is the replacement of the old traditional food guide pyramid that perhaps as a child you remember seeing in the different food groups on it. So My Plate has been around for several years, and you might be like, hey, I've never seen it before. And that could be a failure of nutrition education being able to deliver this to everybody. So I'm delivering it to you now. But I love this because it gives you a picture of what your plate should look like if you want to have a well-balanced meal. So if you look at your plate here, this is a typical dinner plate size. About half of your plate should be coming from fruits and vegetables. Then about a third of it from whole grains, and then about a quarter of it, and yes, I know my math does not add up to 100%. I'm just giving you estimates here. A quarter of it, a healthy protein, whether that's going to be a bean or legume or an animal protein. And if you do include dairy, whether it's cow's dairy or a plant-based milk product, you could have that over here in the side. So of course, not every plate is going to simply look like this. For some people, they really like this though, because they look in their pantry and they see, okay, I'm going to put a fruit here, I'll put a vegetable here, I'll put a grain here, and I'll put my protein here. Other people are going to say, hey, I don't really eat my food in little compartments. I usually mix it up. That's okay too. This gives you a kind of a visualization of the proportions that you should have on your plate, whether they're separated or part of a casserole or something like that. So this can give you a template for healthy meals, and it's important to look at your meals on a daily and weekly basis. So not every meal is going to be divided specifically into this. Perhaps your breakfast is more heavy on fruit and grain, and your lunch and dinner are more heavy on protein and vegetables. the bottom line is you want to look at your diet as a whole overall during the day and overall during the week, because there's going to be days where we have a better diet and there are going to be days that we have a worse diet, but we want to look at our diet on an average over a whole week. If you like to cook, or perhaps you found that you need to now start cooking more, the great news is that you don't have to be an expert. Just like anything, you can look it up online and become not an expert per se, but pretty competent to, prepare something. There are a lot of recipe websites available out there. And sometimes what is a great tool about this, if you go to the advanced search on a recipe website, you can enter in the foods that you actually have on hand. So enter in what you have in your pantry or enter in what you have in your refrigerator, and you'll get recipes based off of that. And that can be very helpful when you're first starting out and you don't want to waste the food that's in your fridge or pantry, but you may not have any idea what to do with this. So go online and get some ideas. And if you're not a skilled chef, that's totally fine too, because you also go into advanced search on many of these recipe websites. You can search by the difficulty of the recipe and also the amount of time it can take. And so for those people who aren't skilled chefs and don't have a lot of time, sometimes simply looking at your dinner plate or lunch plate or breakfast plate as a picture like this and piecing together things can help you in that process of starting to create a healthier meal. If you go to myplate.gov, there are a variety of different resources. You can also download the app, and I'm not necessarily trying to tell you this is the only resource out there, but it is a useful resource because it's pretty simple. And there's a lot of information on myplate.gov that will tell you how to choose foods for each of those different components on that My Plate. And one of the things that myplate.gov points out is, like I said before, you really want to map out your meals. I find that it's helpful to look at my whole week. And I have 3 kids, and even though our lives aren't quite as scheduled as they were prior to the pandemic, we still are busy, and we're still trying to fit in as much as we can in this new normal of our lives. So mapping out the week and looking at what days I may have more time to cook and what days I maybe need to rely on leftovers. Finding a balance, and that's really what we're talking about when we look at our diet as a whole for the day as well as over a week. Varying our protein foods. I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but try and branch out and try some plant-based proteins. Not only are they very nutrient dense, they are also going to be a little bit easier on your food grocery budget. Make a grocery list. Never go to the grocery store without a list. And if you make a list, remember to bring it. That's a problem I have a lot of times. So I've started to take pictures of my list on my phone because I'm pretty good at remembering my phone and pretty bad at remembering my list. And remember to use your leftovers. Now, this is another area where you can start to rely a little bit more heavily on online recipe websites, because maybe you have, like I said, a lot of leftover rice. Rice freezes great. I like to freeze it and then I'll make something with it later on. If you have leftover chicken or leftover beans and not really sure what to do with it, go online and look that up, because there's a lot of creative recipes online on how to better utilize our leftovers. Okay, so the bottom line here is that I probably haven't told you a lot of novel information you didn't know about why eating healthy is good for you. But what I'm hoping is that being in the midst of this pandemic helps to highlight the role nutrition can play in strengthening our body's natural defense systems. So, not only is eating healthy going to reduce our risk for a lot of diet related comorbidities, it's also going to enhance our body's ability to help fight a COVID-19 infection should we become infected with it. And so I think it's important at this point in our lives, more than ever really, is to capitalize on the ability to really make nutrition a focus of our lives right now. Why do we need to make it a focus? Because diet is a healthy way of life. And if you want to live a healthy life, you need to choose a diet that supports that. What do you need to include in this diet? Nutrient dense foods. And how are you going to do it? By creating meals made of these nutrient dense foods that work for you and your family. So I've given you a lot of advice, and hopefully I've been able to also give you some tips and tools on how you can actually implement this advice to improve your overall dietary quality and your behaviors. But I think it's helpful to also leave you with some sage advice from a wise woman, Miss Piggy. Never eat more than you can lift. Thank you, and hopefully you've gotten some great information from this presentation.